Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Luria, and I am with TMC for Seniors. I am thrilled to be able to continue on with our For the Health of It series that we're running this month. And I have Mary Milady and Hunter Zwiekoff with us. Hunter is actually interning he's a U of A student in nutrition, and he is interning with Mary this semester. And they are going to be speaking today about building healthy bones. So welcome.
Hello.
Hi, thank you.
So Hunter, I know you have really done a lot of research on the formula to build healthy bones. So I'm going to go ahead and put your presentation up for you, and you can then go ahead and get started.
Perfect. So yeah, hello, my name is Hunter Zwiekoff. I'm here to talk about bone health and nutrition. You can go to the next slide. This is just a brief overlook of what we'll be discussing, starting with bone structure and ending with foods and substitutes. And we can go next. Starting off, just a little bit of information on bones. They are primarily made of calcium and phosphorus. There are two things that help keep bones in good shape, and those are called osteoclasts and osteoblasts. Osteoclasts I'll call consumers, and osteoblasts I'll call builders, because consumers do break down the bone, whether it's to help with fractures or aid in remodeling, and the blasts or the builders, they do take calcium and rebuild the bones. But the remodeling process, as I had mentioned, takes about 7 to 10 years for the full skeleton to complete. And in the picture, you can kind of see there's two different types of bone tissue. In the center, there's this trabecular bone. The trabecular bone is also referred to as spongy bone. And cortical bone is the other one, which is this very solid, dense bone. Trabecular typically remodels faster and also declines at a faster rate after about the age of 50. But we can move on. As we're growing up from kids, our bone mass density is increasing, and it reaches a peak density once we hit the end of puberty. And after that, we kind of reach this equilibrium where the bone mass density is staying about the same, but decreasing a little bit every year, every so often. But once we hit the age of 50, that starts to decline more rapidly than before. There's two things that affect bone mass density, and first is menopause. I'll talk about that more in detail later, but also diabetes affects bone mass density. Diabetes has been linked to having a lower vitamin D levels in the body, and that is necessary for distributing the calcium to the bones. We can go next. Yeah, so what are some dietary nutrients that we consume for bones? The two main ones are calcium and vitamin D, but phosphorus and sodium are also important, but not as high in the rankings as the first two. So calcium is an absolute must-have because all of the bones are made from it. It is leading with the deficiencies. Those can cause weak bones, and as you're growing up as a child, it can cause stunted growth. Overconsumption also leads to kidney stones, so there can be calcium buildup and deposits in the wrong places that aren't bones. Overconsumption can also lead to a limitation or a suppression of bone remodeling. And as we were talking about earlier, bone remodeling normally takes about 7 to 10 years for the whole body, but it happens all the time. And drowsiness is another side effect of overconsumption. That's a whole neuroscience topic that I will skip if that's okay with everybody, but it's just something to look out for. Okay. And vitamin D is our other wonderful nutrient. It basically breaks down and distributes calcium through the body. Vitamin D not only helps with bones, but it is also anti-inflammatory. A really weird thing that I had found is that a vitamin D deficiency not only leads to weakening bones, but it's also linked with dementia and Alzheimer's. When I was looking into the exact physiology of why it leads to dementia and Alzheimer's, I couldn't find a direct link, but there was information saying that vitamin D, low levels of vitamin D causes cognitive decline. On the other hand, overconsumption of vitamin D is similar to overconsumption of calcium. It can lead to abnormal bone growth and kidney stones. And abnormal bone growth can be like bone spurs, where it's just like deposits randomly on the bone. And so these deficiencies can also cause a few diseases. Paget's disease and osteomalacia are ones that not too many people hear about, but osteoporosis is the next big one, and it's very important. But we can move on to Paget's first. Paget's is more common in men, and it's a result of excessive remodeling. And as you can see on the very right leg, that bone, the femur, is kind of bowed, and that is just too much remodeling has happened in kind of the wrong direction. This results in also weakness of the bone and a malformation of the leg, and you can notice it in people. It's kind of hard to see in this little diagram, but one leg will be straight and then the other leg will be kind of like really curved. I've noticed it's only about in one leg for Paget's disease, but the treatment for it is bisphosphonates as well as calcium supplements. The next one that we can talk about is Rickets and Osteomalacia. Rickets is the same thing as osteomalacia. The only difference is that that's what it's called during childhood, and osteomalacia is what it's called in adulthood. The word breakdown for osteomalacia is bone softness. And as you can see in the little diagram, the bone pores are pretty dense in a normal bone, but then lower in the Rickets osteomalacia picture, it's kind of porous. And if not treated or goes undetected, it can lead to osteoporosis. And osteomalacia does typically happen in both legs as opposed to the one like Paget's, is what I found. So osteoporosis is a big one we should all be worried about. The word breakdown is porous bone disease. And if you look at the picture, you can see that on the left, the normal bone is very dense, kind of like the last one. And it subsequently just gets more holes in it and more pores. But these call for reduced bone density as well as an increased risk fracture, or increased fracture risk, yeah. 1 in 4 women will get osteoporosis, and 1 in 8 men will get it. But why is there such a huge difference between the men and women? 2 really big reasons are pregnancy and menopause. Pregnancy, if a woman, or if the mother is not consuming enough calcium in their diet or vitamin D, the fetus that is developing will actually take the calcium from the mother's bones and body in order to build their skeleton in a healthy manner. So that can lead to lower bone density for the women. And menopause, on the other hand, is a huge factor because it greatly reduces estrogen production. A decrease in estrogen production results in a decrease in the osteoblasts, so a decrease in the builders, but it increases the osteoclasts, so the consumers. With menopause, that means you'll be naturally breaking down the bones more than you are frequently building them up. Other risk factors that besides just being a woman, that you can control include nutritional consumption. So if you're trying to consume adequate amounts of calcium and vitamin D in your diet every day, that will help reduce your risk of osteoporosis. And high caffeine intake is also linked with osteoporosis, but high caffeine intake means about 4 cups of coffee every day. I don't know very many people that consume 4 cups of coffee, but if anyone does, maybe tell them, hey, break it down to 3 or 2, maybe, just to help prevent osteoporosis. But other links are alcohol and tobacco use. Similarly, with alcohol, you can kind of link it to how estrogen works, where alcohol stops the builders, but it doesn't stop the consumers. So the bones will be getting eaten away or consumed at a higher rate than normal. A sedentary lifestyle is the last thing to prevent from osteoporosis, and that just means an inactive lifestyle. So trying to keep active, I'll talk about in the next slide. But why are porous and weak bones an important problem that we can have? It's because fractures are the #1 cause of disability in older adults. It's also the most common cause of hospitalization, and it's a really high contributor to medical costs. The medical costs can include surgery or medication or rehabilitation or aftercare and continued medication if you do get a disability from this fracture. Surprising fact is that only 15% of people with osteoporosis are diagnosed with it. And what's even scarier is that those who do have osteoporosis, who do get a fracture, 1 in 4 of them die within 1 year of the incident. And there's differences between fractures. The locations are a big factor as to if you will have a higher mortality rate. And if we go back 1 slide, the femur is a very typical one. If a fracture happens at the hip, right where the mouse is showing, that is much harder to treat and rehabilitate from. Another one is from the spine, and that one is because your vertebrae are mostly trabecular or that spongy bone as well. But we can go back to the next slide. Yeah, and the next one. So how can we prevent these bone mass density decreases? A good suggestion is to keep regular physical activity at least 150 minutes per week. When I looked into it, the typical suggestion is to get 30 minutes of exercise per day, but less than 5% of Americans actually meet that goal of 30 minutes of exercise per day. So 150 minutes per week is a little bit more attainable. With that, you can try doing aerobic exercises or resistance and balance, or even flexibility exercises. Those will help with keeping your body stable and building a little bit of muscle as well. The next thing to prevent it is trying to consume the daily recommended amounts of calcium and vitamin D. What are those? Those are on the next slide. But if you can't reach those goals, then also asking a doctor about supplementation. Typically for supplementation, there are studies done where calcium itself, it increases your bone mass density, but it does not decrease your risk of fracture. And on the other hand, if you do a vitamin D supplement on its own, that reduces fracture risk, but it does not actually reduce it does not increase bone mass density. But if you put them together, there's a lot of calcium supplements with vitamin D added to it that does increase your bone mass density as well as decreasing your risk of fracture by a little bit. But always speak to a doctor before supplementing just to make sure you are going to be getting what you need, or if you do really need it. I know vitamin D is something that can be screened with your doctors, and once we're getting older, it's definitely important to keep an eye out for it. We can continue. So the recommendations are a little bit different between men and women. Women have a higher dosage at 1,200 milligrams of calcium starting from the age of 50, and that's because menopause typically happens around the age of 50. For men ages 30 to 70, it's at 1,000 milligrams of calcium. And then once you get to age 70, it evens out for both men and women. But it's also the same for vitamin D. You want about 15 micrograms of vitamin D per day in both men and women. And then once you get to the age of 70, it goes up to 20 micrograms of vitamin D once you get past the age of 70. So what sorts of foods have calcium and or vitamin D in them? And there's quite a few different varieties. So dark leafy greens, which can be spinach, kale, bok choy, or even broccoli, are good sources of calcium, as well as soy products, whether it's just soybeans, soy milk, or tofu or tempeh. And dairy is another one, whether it's cow's milk, cheese, or alternative milks, such as like the plant-based milks. I'll talk more about those in a little bit. But there are also fortified grains, such as fortified breads or tortillas. And those fortifications are just enrichments with different sorts of vitamins and minerals, whether it is calcium, vitamin D, like phosphorus, magnesium. And then for juices, I always see fortified juices of orange juice. I haven't looked for other ones, but I know orange juice is a very popular one. And the last one on here for vitamin D is fatty fish. There's not too many natural sources in foods for vitamin D, but fatty fish, including like salmon, tuna, or mackerel, have vitamin D in them. A different source other than foods that you can get vitamin D from is the sun. And looking into it, I know we live in Tucson, Arizona. It's a desert and there's a really high UV index. Our body actually processes those UV rays and turns it into vitamin D for our body. Some people might be worried about whether sunscreen actually hinders the effect of your vitamin D absorption. But all of the studies that I had looked at indicated that the only reduction in vitamin D was with artificial light. So if there's just like a light and someone was sitting with a UV ray right next to them with sunscreen on, that hindered the vitamin D absorption. But with the natural sunlight, there hasn't been any conclusive evidence that that sunscreen hinders vitamin D absorption. So the recommended amount is about 30 minutes in a day to stay outside to get your vitamin D intake, because that's about how much time it takes for the UV rays to process and everything like that. But it doesn't have to be all at once. It could be like 15 minutes in the morning or 15 minutes at night, and just making sure that it's whenever the sun is out. But moving on into what sort of meals you can have to get your daily recommended amount in just one day. The first thing that you could recommend is 2 pieces of toast with breakfast. I would hope you aren't just having 2 pieces of plain toast. You can add some fun stuff on it, such as like peanut butter or avocado, or even like an egg sandwich, because regular toast can be kind of boring, But you can pair that with a glass, 1 cup of milk of your choice. It can be plant-based or animal-based. But then moving on to lunch, I chose a quinoa bowl. It looks like it includes some green onions and broccoli in it. And the broccoli, what's recommended is about 1 cup of a dark leafy green at least, if we're kind of going along this process of what I have set up, to pair it with orange juice. Hopefully it's a fortified orange juice, so you get more calcium with it as well. If you get hungry between meals, you can have half of a cup of almonds or cashews, and that will almost do it for your calcium intake for the day. But for dinner, if you want to get a little bit more vitamin D in, you can have, I believe that's salmon that I included in the picture. Probably don't want to eat it raw, but you can have a fish dish with it, or if you don't want fish, you could also substitute it for tofu, since that'll give you a little bit more calcium as well. And we can go from there. Oh, yeah. So I know I mentioned there's different alternatives for milk and maybe some reasons why you would want to switch from cow's milk. There's a very big abundance of alternative milks, and I only listed 5 of like the big ones. There's probably 10 more than that than I can think of, but some of the reasons why they have been popping up is because a lot of the population is lactose intolerant, and as we get older, we actually become more lactose intolerant as well. Typically, not everybody, but cow's milk has also been linked to cancers such as ovarian cancer, breast cancer, and prostate cancer. And if that's like a concern of yours, I would maybe suggest switching off from it or looking into other ones. And cow's milk also has cholesterol in it, and that's something that you'd want to monitor because it's not an essential nutrient in your diet. We can make it ourselves. But another reason why people might be switching from cow's milk is the ethical implementations. It's a very violent process of getting milk. That's a whole animal ethics topic that I don't need to get into, but we can save it for later if necessary. So we can start with soy. Soy milk is actually the closest balance of nutrients similar to cow's milk. And it can be very beneficial to women either before, during, or after menopause because it contains phytoestrogen. Phytoestrogen, as I like to think of it, is kind of like the vice president if the president was killed. It basically acts as estrogen, but it is not estrogen. And since it's acting as estrogen, it will, if we think back, a lower estrogen level means lower builders and higher consumers. But with phytoestrogen, that can kind of level it back out to hopefully a more equilibrium of the builders and consumers. And so I mentioned phytoestrogen with women before, during, or after menopause because the reduction of estrogen levels. But when it comes to almond milk, soy milk, the one thing to look out for is that it is one of the top 8 allergens. So people may have a sensitivity to it. And if you are, there's obviously plenty of other alternatives to check out, such as almond milk. Almond milk does actually have more calcium levels than normal cow's milk does. And it also has a lower amount of calories. But oat milk is similar in calories to cow's milk, but it does typically have a much higher sugar value in it. I think 17 grams is what a typical oat milk is, not including added sugars, and cow's milk is about 12 or 13 grams of sugar. But that's one that I use. It tastes good. I like it. but hemp milk is actually one that is kind of up and coming, especially around the states where hemp has been kind of illegal to grow. It is very good, especially for people on plant-based diets, because it includes all of the essential amino acids, and it is also rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which people don't typically get as often when on a plant-based diet compared to an omnivorous diet. It's hemp, and no, it does not have the psychoactive effects that marijuana does. If you consumed 100 cups of hemp milk, you wouldn't get any sort of psychoactive effect, if that's what you're trying to do with hemp milk. But besides that, hemp is actually very good for the environment. Hemp seeds make oil and the milk, whereas the body of the plant can be used for construction, textile fabrics, or even papers or plastics. The roots of hemp grow very deep into the soil, and that helps improve this. It helps improve the soil, as well as reduces the fungus in the soil. It doesn't need herbicide or pesticides usually, and that can be very beneficial to surrounding areas, because it's a very large problem with runoff is that just gets leached into the soil elsewhere and can cause a slippery slope of effects. But hemp uses less water than cow milk or almond milk, but more than soy milk. But still, almond and cow milk use a very, very high amount of water if we're thinking about the environmental impact of it. Rice milk is a pretty good one for people who are active. Its calories primarily come from carbohydrates, but it does also have a higher water usage and methane production. The methane comes from these specific bacteria that grow in the rice paddies. And then one last thing about rice milk is that it also may contain high traces or high amounts of arsenic, which is a carcinogen and can also cause disease. So maybe, unless you really know where the rice milk is coming from, stay away from it, because it can contain carcinogens, and that's what you kind of want to stay away from. But that is actually everything for my presentation. And if there are any questions, we can feel free to ask them.
So thanks so much, Hunter. I do actually have some questions that came in. One of the questions that I received was, how do you figure out what the right amount of calcium or vitamin D is so that you don't take in too much or not too little, especially when you're eating it maybe through foods?
So calcium, the recommended amount, depends on your age and the person who's consuming it. Thankfully, most of the foods have the little labels on them saying, out of a 2,000 calorie diet, this is the percentage that you're getting out of it. I know milk is normally about 25% of the daily value of calcium in 1 cup of it. And kind of going from there, just adding it up. I don't know, Mary, do you have anything else that you can kind of suggest to make sure we're not doing too little or too much?
So yes, you can find the recommendations that you provided. Otherwise, if you are eating a well-balanced diet and you're eating a variety of foods, then chances of you meeting your calcium needs are good. If you aren't eating any of the milk products that Hunter mentioned, or any of the food products, that might be something to discuss with your doctor to see if you would need a supplement. With regards to a vitamin D supplement, most physicians these days are testing for vitamin D, because vitamin D deficiency is so common with us that anytime you get a blood panel done, they'll generally do a vitamin D level. And if they can see that you're deficient, then they will recommend the right amount of supplementation for you. So.
Great. And what about, can you provide us any other good sources of calcium other than dairy?
Well, that was on Hunter's slide.
About some of the leafy greens and whatnot, right?
Yeah, dark leafy greens are a very good source of it. And
the nuts.
I'm kind of nuts. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the nuts are a great source. And the great thing about nuts is they're high in calcium, but they're also a really great source of protein and a healthy kind of fat. And then additionally, in some of those fatty fishes, we're going to find not only those good sources of fats, but some calcium as well. And then a lot of products these days, like Hunter put up there, orange juices and some grains, such as some breads and cereals, are fortified with calcium.
Okay, great.
And vitamin D in some cases too.
Okay. Now, what about when we talk about bone disease? Is there a way to tell before it's too late that you have, that you're developing that? And I know you had some slides sort of showing that progression.
Yeah, there are actually ways to get diagnosed with the bone diseases. The most common way is to get an X-ray done. If you believe that you may not have been consuming enough calcium through your diet and stuff like that, or maybe it's a family history that runs in the family, then you can definitely talk to a doctor to get consulted about getting an X-ray done, because that way they are able to tell if there is a lower bone mass density, or you can see that the spongy bone is getting less dense or more porous. And yeah, along with the X-ray, there is another test that requires a different X-ray, but that is another way to tell, is through X-ray.
So a lot of physicians will request women after menopause to get a DEXA scan, which does just what Hunter was talking about, is doing a bone density test, and it's oftentimes just a scan of your heel bone. So it's pretty very non-invasive, pretty easy.
And I know that we offer that actually. I know we offer the DEXA scan. I was actually going to ask, because I wasn't sure about this one, a trabecular bone score. Somebody has asked, is anyone in Tucson offering that? And I wasn't sure if you had that information.
That wouldn't be something that I know.
Okay.
Right, I have not looked into that, so I don't know.
Okay, all right. Let me see here. I also have somebody who asked, she is a senior. She has osteoporosis in her hips, back, spine, plus her neck and jaw. And she does like to maintain a healthy lifestyle and an active lifestyle. Do many vitamins, she does vitamins and she loves to exercise, but she's asking specifically, are there exercises for the jaw and neck?
She would probably want to consult with a physical therapist to ask specifically about that. That's kind of out of Hunter and I's scope.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I think we had a lot of great questions today. And I know you talked about caffeine intake because that one was answered. So that is wonderful. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here, Hunter and Mary, and answering all of our questions and doing some amazing research on, the formula for healthy bones. We don't have any more presentations this week, but please stay tuned for next week. We are going to be doing women's bladder issues on Tuesday, October 19th at 10 a.m. With Dr. Chesrow, and we've got varicose veins prevention and solutions on Wednesday, October 20th. So thank you both for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.